I'm going to say it now. I'm going to call it. 2024 is going to be one of the biggest years for ride sharing, for Uber and Lyft, period. I'm going to say it now. I'm going to put it out there. The date right now is November 9th, 2023. And I'm saying this a couple months before 2024 begins. I have a big prediction that next year is going to be huge for Uber and Lyft. This is going to be a very raw, unedited video. I do these kind of like fireside chat style videos every once in a while when it comes to Uber, Lyft, the ride-sharing world, and just my observation as somebody who was a former accountant studying business and economics and everything, someone who used to be an Uber and Lyft driver as well. So it's interesting looking at all this because I've also, for this channel, read hundreds, maybe at this point over 1,000 different articles about how much drivers make in different areas, the legal implications right now, the logistical implications right now, the insurance issues, all these different things. In addition, I've interviewed over 1,000 drivers, both in person, reading the comments on this channel. I get hundreds upon hundreds of comments. You know, it's insane looking at all this information from my perspective. And I'm going to say it now. 2024 is going to be a big year for a couple different reasons why. I'd say mainly two. If I had to boil it down, there's a lot, but I'd say mainly two. One, in case you didn't know, the amount of people starting to sign up as a driver is blowing up. I think, as we all know, with the economy, things are getting a lot more expensive with people's, like, say, hourly rates not increasing. I've talked about this, by the way, when it comes to driving for Lyft and Uber. You know, but the hourly rate of what people make per hour is not increasing. The minimum wage is not increasing. And in addition to that, the cost of living in general is increasing significantly. So a lot of people are looking at Uber and Lyft as a great option, being like, all right, I definitely need to get a second job now. Unfortunately, I'm not making as much money as I should be right now. I'm going to get a job driving for Uber and Lyft so I can make part-time income, right? And if you think about it, when it comes to Uber and Lyft, whether you love them or not, it is truly, in my opinion, the best secondary job, right? You don't need a crazy degree or anything to join it. I've mentioned this before. You can make, on average, I find $20 to $25 an hour as a rideshare driver. I see reports online. I think I was online last week looking at some different accounting reports because I like to do this. I had to go to school for a 4-year degree to get certified in accounting. I have a bachelor's degree in a business with a concentration in accounting. And I saw some jobs being like, oh, we're looking for somebody with a bachelor's degree in accounting. We'll pay you $21 an hour. And I'm like, okay, either I can go to a 4-year university, spend all that time, student debt, study my butt off, do all this kind of stuff to make the same that I probably would as a rideshare driver. And the barrier to entry as a rideshare driver is pretty much have a license, right? Because you can rent a car. So a lot of people are looking at being a rideshare driver is a great option. The flexible schedule, as we all know, instant cash outs. You can turn on the app whenever you want. It's not like the app says, hey, you can only start driving at 7 a.m. You can't start at 6 a.m., for example. Although I'm going to put an asterisk on that. There's a lot to this. But one, I think a lot of people now are signing up, which means the more people that are signing up, and I think this is growing exponentially or growing significantly by the day, next year is going to be I'm going to predict, oversaturated market when it comes to Uber and Lyft. And I think there's a good amount of cons that come with that. I personally, this is my perspective, don't see anything good coming out of that. I could be wrong, but we'll see. The second big reason why I think 2024 is going to be a big year for Lyft and Uber is what happened in New York. I've already done a video about it. You can watch a video if you want. I'll post it in the description below. It was a big deal. Basically, that Uber and Lyft got fined now to back pay retroactively of all these different fines and fees. Basically, for lack of better explanation, they were screwing over drivers when it comes to things like unemployment and all these other kind of fees that that drivers should be getting and benefiting from. Uber and Lyft did a lot of kind of scammy and scummy stuff because you're like, hey, our rideshare drivers are independent contractors. We can treat them how we want. And in case you didn't know, Uber and Lyft, not the best companies when it comes to how they treat their rideshare drivers. So they got fined. And a lot of attorneys and legal counsel, when it comes to reviewing what happened in New York, the fact that it was a monumental milestone. In the video, I literally titled the video, "This may be the biggest news to ever happen," because the ripple effect is going to be very massive, in my opinion. I think it's almost inevitable. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. I've talked before about Prop 22 here in California. Prop 22 happened a while ago, so I will say that. So it was definitely a while ago, but now in California, rideshare drivers have minimum hourly guarantees. They also have benefits as well. So things are improving for rideshare drivers, but I think after the New York case, and it's kind of weird, when it comes to the ride-sharing world and the legal world in general, you have federal laws, which of course are countrywide, but then you also have state-to-state laws. And it's very interesting here in America, here in the States, that when it comes to ride sharing, you could drive in two completely different states, and the logistics, how you drive, all these different things could be vastly different. Your car that you currently, let's say, use to drive could qualify in one state, but not qualify in another state. I've mentioned before in a lot of other videos as well. Your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make as a rideshare driver. There's a lot to your location, and I think especially now, as we approach 2024, the big thing with the location now is the legal implications. There's been a lot of talk too. I know some rideshare drivers agree with me on this, some disagree with me on this. Should you be an independent contractor or an employee? I honestly don't know. I've gone back and forth about this a lot. My initial answer is I think rideshare drivers should be employees. This should be a topic for a whole different video where I can really go in depth. But I've gone back and forth though, because there are advantages to being an independent contractor. I think the biggest con though, especially for this video, the biggest con though to being an independent contractor as a rideshare driver is you get little to no protection. Yes, there's a lot of benefits of being an independent contractor, but when it comes to Lyft and Uber, especially with these companies, in my opinion, being a bit predatory, like taking advantage of drivers and screwing them over a lot, I hate to say it, but not having that protection is a massive issue when it comes to rideshare driving, which is why, although being an independent contractor has a lot of benefits, that is one big con. And like I said, as we approach 2024, I'm very curious to see what happens, because the more drivers that are getting on the road, that means all the issues of Lyft and Uber are going to be amplified, right? If you have 10 drivers complaining about things that are going on, that's one thing. But if you have 100 or 1,000 complaining, there's going to be a lot more talk, right? As Lyft and Uber has gotten more and more popular, and there's been more and more drivers on the road, there's been a lot more drivers complaining about all the negative things Lyft and Uber is doing. And that makes sense. And that's the exact reason why I think what happened in New York, this issue of Lyft and Uber screwing over drivers has now gotten so much media attention. It got to the point where New York said, in terms of the legislation, was like, okay, you know what? We're actually going to find Uber and Lyft. We think that the drivers actually have a point here and all this kind of stuff. So I think that's a huge step in the right direction. And I can see other states following suit. So these two things going on with the big New York case happening and winning, it was definitely a win for rideshare drivers, although I think it should have been a bigger win. At least it was a start. I would say at least it was a start. But then you look at all these people joining Lyft and Uber. I think with all these things happening at once, I think it should be a huge kind of perfect storm of a lot happening. And I think one thing I've started to see, I've read more and more articles about this. There have been some reports of, I don't say Lyft and Uber being worried, but there have been some claims of some people who say, look, this might be an issue as rideshare drivers not being able to work whenever they want. Now, here's what I mean. I've talked about this before in other videos. This is a big benefit of Lyft and Uber. So I used to be a bartender, right? And I remember some people, when I used to bartend, this is an example I use in a lot of videos, would be like, it would go to my boss and say, hey, I need more hours. I need more hours. Can I work this Saturday? Can I work this Sunday? Like, do you have any extra hours for next week? I need to pay off this bill. I need the money, whatever. And I remember my boss would be like, no, sorry. Like, we have a fixed finite amount of hours. And unfortunately, we're all booked up. I can't give you any more hours. I can't help you out, unfortunately. With Lyft and Uber, that's something theoretically you never have to worry about. You never have to worry theoretically about you turning on the app and saying, sorry, there are too many drivers on the road. Come back in an hour. You can't drive right now. Or you never have to worry about Uber and Lyft saying, hey, you know what? For you, Joe Schmo or Gina Schmo, right? You can only drive Monday through Friday, Saturday and Sunday are booked up this week. You don't really have to worry about that. You turn on the app whenever you want. You turn it off whenever you want. However, it is very likely and very possible that the market could get so saturated next year, and good, who knows, it's tough to say, but it's going to get so saturated that it could be the case where Uber and Lyft starts kind of putting limits on when and how people can drive. Now, do I think that they're going to do that? Personally, I don't think so. I don't think they'd actually go out of their way to do that, because that's one of the biggest benefits of being a driver. I don't think they'd do that, but it would be a passive approach as opposed to an aggressive approach. And what I mean is, I don't think Uber and Lyft, if let's say you turn on the app, would say, hey, just letting you know, the next hour or the next 2 hours, we have a ton of drivers on the road right now. You might not get a ride. I don't think they would ever do that. I might be wrong, but I don't think they'd ever do that, because as a driver, the second you would see that, you'd be like, I've never seen that. And then in the future, you might be less and less likely to drive because now you're always thinking like, oh man, if I turn on the app again, is it going to have that same kind of effect? You know what I mean? And be in the back of your mind, excuse me, and you can actually drive anytime you want. I've mentioned this before in other videos. Like say when it comes to deactivation, similar issue. Uber and Lyft, oh man. My throat today, I usually film these videos in the morning as a side note, so I feel like I'm like still slowly waking up, but this has been all on my mind. But when it comes to Uber and Lyft, when it comes to deactivation, a big thing that they've talked about, and a lot of drivers have talked about, is like if you get deactivated, meaning your account gets temporarily disabled for a BS reason, a passenger makes something up about you, happens all the time, you get deactivated, you get let back on in like say a week. But one, you miss out on a week's worth of work, and two, you'd always turn on the app thinking like, I really hope they don't deactivate me this time, right? Be a huge, huge issue. Likewise, I think if Lyft and Uber ever did a note like that, it would be a bigger deal than most people think. So here's my guess. I don't really do it aggressively, being like, hey, just letting you know, we're busy. You might not get a ride at all. I think they do it passively. I think you'd just be sitting there. And this actually happened to me years ago when I used to drive in Boston, when Lyft and Uber wasn't as big as it is now. I remember way back in the day, there were times I would turn on the app and get one ride an hour. And I'm like, great, I just wasted a whole ride. And ironically, this is the worst part too. It would always be a bad ride. It's not like I'd be like, all right, I'm doing one ride in an hour, but it's a high-paying ride. No, it usually was always like a $5 ride or something. And I'm like, great, I just made $5 an hour. Like, this is ridiculous, right? I could see that potentially happening. I mean, I remember a lot of drivers had this in the pandemic that they'd be driving and they'd be like, yeah, I only get one ride an hour because no one was really taking Ubers and Lyfts during the pandemic and like in the peak of it. It could be something very similar to that, right? Now, how's that going to be approached? I don't know. Because another big thing, like I said, here in California with Prop 22, after it happened in New York, for example, drivers now have minimum hourly guarantees. So to Uber and Lyft, though, they might say, there's a lot of drivers on the road. There's too many on the road. We know, because a lot more people are joining Lyft and Uber, we know that not all these people can get rides nonstop, as they typically do. We know there's gonna be some people, the roll of the dice, that might just get 1 to 2 rides an hour, but we still have to pay for their minimum wage. We still have to give them a minimum hourly guarantee. That's gonna be a huge hit to Lyft and Uber's earnings, right? Because at least here in California and New York now, and maybe other states will follow suit, typically, I think if you're driving and you're pretty much driving the whole hour, you're going to make more than the minimum hourly guarantee. Typically, you will, right? So Lyft and Uber, it's kind of more of like a foundation that they don't have to worry about. But if you're, like, say, only doing, like I said, one ride an hour, like I did in Boston sometimes when it was slow, and that one ride only pays $5, Lyft and Uber is going to have to compensate you back up to that minimum hourly guarantee or that minimum wage or whatever it is, right? So because they have to kind of bump you back up, if there's too many drivers on the road, it's very likely Uber and Lyft will now have to start spending more money because there's so many drivers out there to bump up all their guarantees, right? Because they're guaranteeing them, they're going to make at least this much. And if they don't, they're going to bump them up. This could cause a very unique issue. And that's why I'm very curious in 2024 to see what happens. And then when you combine all of that with the, I think, potential and almost inevitable, I don't know if it's inevitable exactly, but the saturation of drivers on the road, what's going to happen then with all that going on, with a lot of drivers going on the road, maybe drivers now not getting as many rides as before, making less money than ever before? What is then going to happen with this New York case, creating a ripple effect throughout the entire country? Will there be something put into place where, let's say, rideshare drivers get even bigger protections? I'm not sure. I'm not going to lie, it's a very washy landscape right now. And I've said this before in other videos. About 25% of drivers I've interviewed and I've talked to love driving for Uber and Lyft. They make great money, all the benefits I've talked about. 75% of drivers hate it and they're like, I'm quitting soon, right? I'm just gonna say next year, I don't know, honestly. I just think next year is gonna be a big year for ride sharing. And I'm just looking at all the facts and analytics. I read so many articles for this channel, way more than you think. You know, sometimes in a lot of videos, it seems like I just pull up an article and read through it. But that's usually after me looking through a bunch of articles and studying different things to figure out what's the best approach, what's the best written article for this one video. I do a lot of work for all these kind of Lyft and Uber videos because I want to be super transparent for all my drivers out there and also be super factual as well. And I don't know, just looking at everything, I think 2024, for better or for worse, I genuinely don't know, is just going to be, in general, a big year for ride sharing.